Now, I told you earlier in this presentation that we would get around to talking about the suicide report, and we're going to do that for a few minutes. You'll recall that Lisa Milton and Kathy asked for a copy of that report in January of 2008, and they were told the file had been destroyed, and that in December of 2009, Heather Catallo gave me the suicide report. And I made a trip out to Bloomfield Township to try to find out why we had been denied a copy of that report. And I met with Lieutenant Cook, and he told me this. He said that the chief had called him in and said, find this Busch suicide report. He didn't know why or anything else. He just knew the chief told him to find the report. He told me that he and a secretary spent a day and a half in the file room and found that it had been misfiled. And that's how they located it. Now, the Michigan State Police reports that we got in December of 2010 show that that report was delivered to the Michigan State Police in February of 2008, 1 month after Lisa Milton had been told the file had been destroyed. And the Michigan State Police reports also had information about the suicide that was not in the Bloomfield Township reports, including the photographs of the suicide scene that we've referred to before and subsequent to this part of the report. The contents of the report raised several questions that have caused me concern, but the maid came to the Busch residence, the parents' residence, on Monday in accordance with their normal cleaning day, and noticed that there were newspapers on the front porch and she could hear some dogs barking. So she went across the street to report to a neighbor, and the neighbor called Charles Busch, the brother. Charles lived within a mile or two of his parents' house. Charles's report indicates that, the report indicates that he called the Bloomfield Township Police Department and then visited the house. When they got to the house, the front door was locked, and they knocked it down and got into the house, although they later found out that the door to the garage was unlocked. And they went up to the bedroom and found that Christopher's body. The report indicates he'd been dead for some period of time. He'd shot himself between the eyes with a rifle, and that his arms were under the covers. The report also indicates there was no gun residue on his hands. And on the wall of Christopher's bedroom, there was this picture. It looks like a young man, a young boy in agony, and he is wearing a hooded matter, which is identical to the outfit worn by Mark Stebbins the day he was kidnapped. First of all, why would anybody keep a picture of that nature on their wall? It's a horrifying picture. And that caused some concern to everybody involved. Some people thought maybe the picture was put up by somebody who murdered Chris to make it look like he was involved in the Oakland County child killings. But his nephew, Brent Busch, had recalled seeing that picture on his Uncle Chris's bedroom wall prior to the suicide, so we know it had been up there for a while. And why would you keep a picture of that neighbor on your wall, that picture on your wall to start with? There were also ropes and gun shells in the bedroom. Both Mark and Chris had indications on their bodies that they'd been tied up.
Mark and Tim.
Excuse me, I meant Mark and Tim. The task force was, there was no indication of any other location of where any shots had been fired, although we had empty shells in the bedroom. Why you would leave empty shells in the bedroom without having shot them up there, I don't know, but there's no indication in the reports of any other location where shots had been made. Chris, tell us what happened or we'll shoot you. That went through my mind. I have no reason to believe that's true, but it's a possibility. And the report also indicated that Ron Pierce and John Davis of the task force were called within an hour after this police officer got to the bedroom. Busch is cleared, tip 369. We've covered that. There's no follow-up on it. Everybody else that calls that name in, it's cleared, tip 369. Why did they call the task force when they got to this scene unless Busch was still on the Oakland County Task Force radar? I want some explanation from somebody about that. There's no report in the file from Pierce or Davis. One of them, and I forget which one, talked with Corey Williams, said he was retired and would call and visit with Corey when he got to town the next summer. He called Corey and made arrangements to meet with him, but never showed up. I believe whoever is looking into this case should check with both of those individuals about their reaction to what they saw and for some explanation as to why the task force showed up if Busch had been cleared. Now we're going to get into the photographs of the suicide scene a little later in this presentation, or maybe we've covered it already. But the copies we got from the Michigan State Police were blacked out, and we've been told by Matt Phelps of Investigative Discovery that he'd seen over 200 similar photographs and had never seen that. So I don't know why the material was blacked out, but we ultimately got copies as we'll talk about. Still a serious question in our mind as to whether Busch was killed or committed suicide. Kevin Dietz of Channel 4 brought this to the attention of Western Ontario University, and they have a program in London, Ontario, for their criminal justice students to participate in some examination of cold cases, and they contacted us and came down here to check into it. And representatives of the university and the students finally issued a 25-page report on the Oakland County child killer case, and they were quite critical of the decision that Busch had committed suicide. They believed that the evidence indicated a possible murder. And I understand even the Oakland County prosecutor has acknowledged that that's a problem. To my knowledge, she's not issued any cold case to resurrect the possibility that this was a murder. And you sit and look at the whole file, and when you can't sleep at night, everything goes through your head. Your son or your brother has molested your children. Would you want revenge? Busch is involved in the Oakland County child killer case. Things are circling down on who's ever responsible for this, and I think it's highly likely that a lot of people were involved. Well, we don't want Busch giving up anything, so he could have been killed by his friends in the business. The police people think Busch is involved back in 1978. They say, well, if we arrest him, he'll just make the papers, and his daddy gets him off of everything else. He's been convicted 4 times and never gone to jail. And police people might think that following up on that's a waste of time and thought they were justified in killing Busch. Of course, my family would make them the Officer of the Year, but I can understand why they wouldn't want to have that recognition, because they'd be charged with murder. So, like everything else we've looked at in this case, every time we get access to something that's been denied us, it raises a half a dozen new questions for us, and provides us with no answers. I think somebody ought to talk to Charles Busch and find out, for instance, why he called the cops. I've talked to a number of friends of mine, and even my own children. If I wasn't answering the phone and it came to their attention, would they call the cops, or would they come over and look at the door? Very few of my friends, but not all, have said they would just come over and check things out before they called the cops. And as I've talked about Charles in the Busch family presentation of this report, I think he owes a lot of explanations to everybody that should be revisited by the law enforcement people. But when we go back to the beginning, it's the first time we're given a missing file early on in the proceedings with no legitimate reason why we shouldn't have been given that information in January of 2008.